Salute, ladies. Today we are going to be talking about chapter 13 in Wheelock's Latin. This is another pronoun chapter. This one is dealing specifically with reflexive pronouns and the reflexive adjective, as well as intensive pronouns, which double as adjectives. Um, you need to understand one thing about these pronouns, and that is, excuse me, reflexive pronouns always refer back to the subject. So what that means, of course, is that there is no nominative reflexive pronoun because everything is going to refer back to the subject no matter how it's being used. If it's used as a direct object, that direct object is somehow referring back to the subject. The first and second person reflexive pronouns are going to be the same as the personal pronouns, just without the nominative form, okay? So this is how you're going to be able to say things like, I love myself, right? I being the subject, and then love, and then the direct object being reflexive because it refers back to the I and the subject, myself. I love myself, right? There is a third person reflexive pronoun. This pronoun is the same for the singular and plural. It also does not have a nominative, and it follows the pattern of tui tibi te te, the second person reflexive pronoun, as you will see in a few slides. Now, just to remind you, just to kind of make this make sense, just to help it click, if you want to use the first person reflexive pronoun, then your subject has to be first person, right? So if you want to use the first person singular, your subject has to be first person singular. If you want to use the third person plural, your subject has to be a third person plural, okay? So before I show you in sentences how these pronouns work, let's take a look at how they decline. Okay, so as promised, the first person singular reflexive pronoun, the first person plural reflexive pronoun, the second person singular reflexive pronoun, and the second person plural reflexive pronoun are identical to the personal pronouns, except they do not have a nominative form. Okay, and again, that's because the whole function of a reflexive pronoun is that it refers back to the subject. We tend to use the term myself for the first person singular in English, ourselves for the first person plural, yourself for the excuse me, for the second person singular, and yourselves for the second person plural. I want to point out just one more thing here, which is that, again, when you want to say with myself, with ourselves, with yourself, with yourselves, you're going to take me, nobis, te, and wobis and stick cum on the end of them. So it's still going to be me cum, wobis cum, te cum, and nobis cum. Now, the new form you have to learn is the third person reflexive pronoun. There's only one form for both the singular and the plural, and it's sui, sibi, se. So you can translate this singularly, himself, herself, itself, or as a plural, themselves. And of course, you'll know whether it should be singular or plural based on the subject, right? So if the subject is a third person singular, you're going to translate it one of these three ways. If it's a third person plural, if it's a plural, a nominative plural, it's going to be themselves, okay? All right, let's look at a couple sentences to get an idea of how to translate the the reflexive pronouns. Ooh, my mouth got ahead of me. In each of these four sentences, I have a reflexive pronoun, okay? In this first sentence, daddy, that is a first person singular, perfect active indicative. So since it's first person singular, if you want to use the reflexive, you have to use the first person singular reflexive pronoun, which is me, he, me. Okay. So again, second example, debatus, meaning our subject is you plural or y'all, which means if you want to use the reflexive pronoun, you have to use the second person plural. In the third example, we have a third person singular, right, in our verb. We do have a nominative subject, Kaiser, and so we're using the third person reflexive pronoun to refer back to Caesar. And in the third example, we have a first person plural verb, which means that our reflexive pronoun needs to be the first person plural. So let's take a little bit closer of an investigation. This first person, right, using the first person reflexive, I gave a donum, a gift, mihi, to myself. Okay? This mihi referring back to the I that is the subject. In the second example, vos deligera debatis, y'all ought to love vos, yourselves. And again, this vos referring back to the second person plural subject. It's a little bit easier to see the reflexive with the third person because you can literally have an arrow go back to the actual subject. So here, Caesar sent his son, say, away from him. Okay, away from himself. Sometimes in English we drop the self. In this example, Caesar sent the son away from himself. Sounds a little bit awkward. We would probably say away from him in English. English just tends to be a bit more vague with our use of the pronouns, whereas the Romans were not. Latin is very specific on their pronoun use. And then our last example, excuse me, culpabamus. So again, if we want to refer back to it, we were often blaming nos, ourselves, referring back to that first person plural subject. There are also reflexive adjectives, and again, it's sort of at this point, based on the experience you guys have with meus, mea, meum, and tuus, tua, tuus, tua, tuum, it's suus, suus, suum, which tends to translate his own, her own, its own, their own, depending on what the subject is. So consider the following example. Amo meam filiam. I love my own daughter, right? I love my daughter. I love my own daughter. This is one way in which Latin is a lot more specific with their pronoun uses than English is. If I were to say, Cicero uxorum suam amavit. In this example, the Latin very clearly shows that Cicero loves suam uxorum, his own wife, okay? Whereas if you had written Cicero uxorum eius amavit, what you would be saying is that Cicero loved the wife of that other guy, okay? So this is the difference between Cicero loves his wife and Cicero loves his wife. And in Latin, it's very specific. In English, a bit more vague. Our last example, the Romani patrium suam bene defenderunt. The Romans defended suam patrium, their own city, well. It's interesting to take note that, of course, as an adjective, these have to agree with the noun that they're describing in gender, number, and case, but it always refers back to the subject. So in this case, we know we're going to translate suam, their own, because our subject is plural, as opposed to the previous example, Cicero uxorum suam amavit, we're going to translate this his own because our subject is singular. Okay? Now, similar in translation, but completely different in function are the intensive pronouns adjectives. They're the same forms, just used as a pronoun and an adjective. An intensive pronoun intensifies the function or the noun that it describes, okay? So depending on what it's describing, it can translate as myself, ourselves, yourself, oh goodness, yourself, yourselves, himself, herself, itself, or themselves. Okay, can translate as any of the selves. Okay. Intensives intensify any function, okay? So they can be any case, they can be nominative. So you need to not confuse intensives and reflexives. Reflexives always referring back to the subject, whereas intensives are just intensifying any given function or noun, okay? The look of the intensive pronoun adjective is different, but it follows the same pattern as the demonstratives that we're already used to, right? So ipsa, ipsa, ipsum, ipsius, that ius ending in the genitive singular, that I ending in the dative singular, familiar to us now, right? Because we've already learned the demonstrative in the third person personal pronoun. So ipsius, 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 ipsi, 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 ipsum, ipsam, ipsum, ipso, ipsa, important macron for me, ladies, ipso. Ipsi, ipsi, ipsa, ipsorum, ipsarum, ipsorum, ipsis, ipsips, ipsis, ipsos, ipsas, ipsa, ipsis, ipsis, ipsis. So the pattern being very familiar to us for the intensive pronoun and adjective. Okay, so let's just take a couple of examples to identify the differences between the intensive and the reflexive pronouns, okay? Let's look at this first sentence. Cicero ipse me laudavit, okay? Cicero himself. So this intensive pronoun intensifying the noun that it's describing. So ipse, as we know from the previous chart, is nominative singular masculine, and therefore it is the same gender number in case as Cicero, which is nominative singular masculine. So it's intensifying Cicero. Cicero himself praised me. Okay, as opposed to using the reflexive pronoun, which changes the meaning to Cicero praised in the accusative say himself, referring back to the subject, which is Cicero. Again, another example, consul honores quibus ipsis data. The consul gave honors to the citizens themselves, okay, intensifying quibus because, of course, both of them are dative, plural masculine. However, in the second sentence, changes the meaning completely when we use sibi as our dative. Consul honores sibi dedit. Okay, the consul gave honors sibi to himself. Okay, referring back to that subject. All right, come in with your notes tomorrow and with any questions, and I will see you then. Walete.